shortly. Hello and welcome to the Effect podcast streaming on the YouTubes and also the Twitches. Um, this is a special one off discussion with our friend and patron, Andy. Say hello, Andy.
Hello, Andy.
And who are you and what makes you famous?
I don't know what makes me famous, but I'm an old school friend of yours.
Well,
If
there
that's a
is
claim
that
to
as
fame,
well.
then there you go.
And you're well known on the Traveller Fora, aren't you?
I've been on Traveller forums for the best part of 30 years, yeah.
Since it invented forums, in fact. Um,
Probably.
so we are talking about Dune today. We're not talking about what's on the screen currently, but I thought we ought to at least
I
give
think we
some
should
credit.
touch on it.
Yeah, exactly. So if I head, I'm not looking at you now, so you can make all sorts of rude signs at me because I'm looking now at this. This is the Modifius.net pages, and if you know modifius.net/Dune, it'll take you to a pre-order page, which you then have to click through to get to here. And this is the splendid pre-ordering page for Dune Adventures in the Imperium. Now, I don't know, Andy. This logo here, is this the one they're using for the movie,
I think it's the same, yeah.
or at least very similar? Because a new edition of the Dune board game came out last year, I think, and
Yep.
that hasn't got exactly the same typeface, but a very similar sort of typeface. And this, particularly this book here, the House Atreides version, this looks a lot like some of the House Atreides images I have seen from filming.
Mm.
But you know, there's a lot of things. Now, I have to say, I haven't ordered this for reasons that we
Neither
may
have I.
discuss later in the program. Neither of you,
Yeah.
but I have
No.
managed to sell it to two different people. So, Modifius, if you're listening, that's a fiver each you owe me. That's a tenner, I'm expecting.
Well, I don't think you can count a fiver in Dave's case because you say, Dave, I think you should buy it, and Dave just goes off and buys it. So
No,
it's
no, it
it's
normally goes
almost
along
an
the lines of,
automatic thing.
Dave, I don't think we need to buy this, do we? And then by the time we've had the end of that conversation, Dave has actually bought it. But that's just a weirdness of Dave. But somebody else, can't remember who, was it Guru Phil? Um,
Maybe. I don't know, to be
Somebody
honest.
else I was talking to went out and bought it as well. Um, Pretty much having to, they said that they wouldn't.
Mm.
It's interesting, these packages, because I think some of them look like quite good value.
I like the
Um,
art. I like the bundle packages, and I see the bundle's already sold out, so it must be popular.
Yeah,
Um,
so this standard players bundle here, you can spend 45 quid on the book,
mm.
or you can get one here with the dice set and sort of very
Well,
fancy character sheet stroke notebook thing
I'm not
for
impressed
60
with the
quid.
dice. I have to be honest, I'm not impressed with the dice.
How come you're not
Uh,
impressed with the dice?
I seem to remember we had this conversation, which was the
Well,
D20
let's have it
system.
again for the benefit of our viewers and listeners.
Yeah, the D20 system, as far as I remember, and probably as far as you remember, was D20 and D6. And
Mm.
these are D20 only, as far as I can see. So I don't know
Well,
if
yeah,
that's a change in the rules or that's a lack of dice, or
I'm
so there is
assuming
there is
this is a
that.
change to the rules.
Hmm.
Um,
Didn't you have effect dice or D6 effect dice or something?
Yeah, there were. No, I haven't got them nearby. So I've got a Star Trek
Yeah,
adventure set. Uh, I'm just answering Randy here, who has said hello. Hey, Randy,
hello, Randy.
nice to have you joining us. Um, I'm not sure we're going to get many other people because Guru Phil's, who shares a similar audience to ours, is having his stream at the moment. You should have told me. I could have let you join that stream, Andy. And
I literally didn't know until a couple of hours before he was doing it, and I thought rather than stress everyone, I would just play Kramer versus Kramer and run to whichever stream was appropriate. And he had two or three other people already, which kind of made the decision somewhat easier. So
cool. Yeah. So Aaron Nathan's joined us as well. Say hi, Nathan. Hi, Nathan. Um, So, what was I saying? Dice. Yeah,
Yeah,
I think the rules must have changed because the Star Trek Adventures dice come with, as you say, 2 or 3 D20s and 4 or 6
yeah,
D6s. Not massively useful D6s because they haven't got any numbers on. They've only got the symbols they use for various effect.
yeah.
Uh, but um, but that's it.
It's
I can
really,
only imagine they've changed the system if they're not
I
doing
don't
those
think it's a
D6s.
problem per se. It just seems odd at first glance. I'm sure
Yeah.
most people that buy this have probably got some D6 floating around anyway. But
Yeah,
it's
so here's a bit of a close up of one of the dice sets, and you can see one, two,
a
three, four,
large blue.
five, and you can
Yeah.
have them in Arrakis or in Melange. I wouldn't be
Mhm.
surprised if at some point they come out with a lovely green one for House Atreides and
Possibly.
Harkonnen one and all that sort of stuff. So lovely, lovely artwork is what you were saying a bit earlier on, and
Yeah,
um,
it's obviously a very well produced, as most Modipia stuff is, I think, actually very well produced, high quality book, and they've applied the premium price to it. But I think it's probably worth it given the fact that it looks like a premium product. So, uh,
yeah, and I don't know so much nowadays whether 45 quid is a premium price.
well, I mean, just to compare for a minute, the Free League Alien book was what 38.40 or something,
I
and
think
most
you
of
got that at a discount.
the
I'm only saying that because I sold it to you, and I think that was a discounted price for it being a sort of pre-release thing at Dragon Meet
it was
last year,
Dragon Meat, wasn't it? Yeah,
2 years ago.
was
Yeah,
it
I,
two years
I, I
ago?
think it's normally about 40 quid.
Yeah, so I mean, maybe not a premium price, but the bundle packages seem to be slightly premium.
Yeah.
Um, so I don't know, but in any case, yeah, it looks like a very well done thing. The artwork is very good. It's slightly cultish, I think, in the way it's done. I think it's the same artist or similar artist.
Might be
Um,
from that
yeah,
stable, yeah.
yeah. So I think it looks really good, but I haven't ordered it.
No, no. And I haven't either. Now,
Excuse me.
we have discussed why we haven't ordered it and why it's rather surprising that my co-host Dave has. And that
Yes,
is
well,
that.
I was
Yeah,
surprised
go and
by
say
Dave. Anyway,
say a thing.
I was surprised that they bought it actually,
Yeah, yeah.
because he's
Given how
renowned for
much,
saying on the podcast how he hates 2D20.
yes,
And the very thing I didn't think he would do is then go and buy a 2D20 based game.
another
So,
2D20 game. So
yes, because he's
I,
got
I have
two.
my own problems with 2D20, and I'm not going to diss other people's systems because, some people like ham and pineapple on their pizza. I don't, but go ahead, eat ham and
Yeah,
pineapple on your pizza, play your 2D20 games. Some of the things for me, actually, Dave and I have a different opinion on 2D20, and I think it's great for Star Trek,
mm.
and it's not good for Conan, and those are the only 2 games I've played.
Well, I've never played Conan. I think I played Star Trek once, maybe. I can't remember. Um, Conan for me is always a funny one because I think that well, we'll get on to backgrounds and rule sets in a minute, but
Yes,
I
yes,
think that
that's
lends
kind of
itself
the
to a
reason why we're joining here. But
yeah.
but yeah, just
But
just to say briefly that it has quite a lot of meta currency in it, so
mm,
you can acquire momentum through doing different things. You can spend that momentum, and importantly, you can pass the momentum pool on to other people. So
yeah,
your success, and I feel this is great for Star Trek, your success on the con means the
mm,
guy shooting the guns can spend some extra momentum and get
yeah,
an increased chance of success there.
it's a
And that
team thing.
feels very Star Trek to me, and I'm very happy to play that. Whatever Dave's problems it has with not being able to lock phasers on, I kind of feel when you say lock phasers on, that's kind of phasers a lock captain is here, have some extra momentum points from me because I've done
Yeah,
this brilliant scan. But no, Dave doesn't like that. Anyway, so that's that. The real problem I have with it in Conan is it has a similar sort of thing uh, with that sort of teamwork. But for me, the principle of Conan is
it's the
not
lone
about
barbarian.
teamwork. Or he's
Yeah,
got a mate, he occasionally has a couple of hangers on, but you never really see them working in a team, do you? I
No,
mean, they're in the
and
story. They may have
but
important things to do.
invariably, he normally ends up either causing them to die, they die on his behalf, or he kills them himself. So they're not really team members; they're cannon fodder of some kind.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
so
Um, so for me, that's why 2D20, which is a perfectly good system for role playing.
I'm not saying
Uh,
it's a bad system. I'm
no,
expressing
no.
a personal dislike rather than a general criticism.
But it
Um,
leads into a bit of the discussion that we had because, as I say, the difference between Star Trek, where for me the system there is working towards the spirit of the game and the sort of stuff you do with the game,
mm,
and so the system works really well there. I think it works less well in Conan because I feel it kind of goes against the spirit of the Conan stories. And I did this whole argument because we ought to be saying here that we're publicly having an argument, or we're
well, a
concluding an
debate, not
argument
an
here.
argument. I don't hate you for your viewpoint. It's a debate.
Well, no, but I like to think that people, used to be able to argue without necessarily hating each other. That
About
may
rancor, yeah.
be different in modern politics, but less said about that, the better.
Enough of that. But yeah,
But we had an argument. It started off something like me saying because I'd been invited to a playtest game to a group with a GM who'd
yes.
been given the early edition. And as it turns out, that game didn't go terribly well because all the players knew Dune better than the GM. And she got, I think, a little bit overwhelmed after running her first session and decided she didn't want to run anymore. So we didn't do any
Right.
more than that. And it turned out she didn't know Dune at all. She hadn't read the book, seen the film, watched the TV series, or anything. So I thought, it's quite brave of her to take that book and say, tell you what, I'm going to run this. When she'd said, I'm going to run the Dune playtest, I thought, oh, here's a Dune fan. I didn't know that, but that's great.
It's something
Because
like
I'm not a big
1,000
Dune fan.
pages. You can't really sort of. I mean, yeah, that's off to her for trying to wing 1,000 pages of background material. But yes, yeah,
Well, that's a good point here from Tobar Step. That yeah, it is hard to leave out teamwork, but what I think what I'm saying is that I feel the 2D20 system is really good at at gamifying teamwork, but that's not necessarily a good thing. Anyway, let's
let's move on.
cut back to our discussion. So I think I'd said something along the lines of, well, I only played the one scenario, and of course back then we only had a very small rules packet that was basically about how characters worked. But I said it didn't feel to me like there were many changes that I could see that reflected the story. And I think you kind of said, well, do there need to be any? I mean, the system's a system. It's the GM that makes the changes. To which I said, no, it isn't. This is, shall we say, a long discussion that you and I have had possibly for something like 20 years.
Yeah.
Um,
And the crux of it is your viewpoint, as I understand it, and correct me if I'm wrong.
no,
Is
you are wrong, but yeah, state
you know
my
what I mean?
viewpoint.
Your viewpoint, as I understand it, is that you believe that the rule system and the background are intermeshed. Excuse me, to the extent whereby they are one book, and you may tweak some basic system, but you tweak it to support that background, and it's one product. So Dune is a product. It's not a 2G20 core book that's then modified for Dune or whatever.
I'm
And
not saying
my
that those things
viewpoint,
can't exist, but what I'm saying
no, that's
is
fine.
it's better when system and setting are intermeshed.
Yeah. And my viewpoint was, well, back in the olden days, as it were, and I am going back a long way here, but you bought a system and then you built your world, or you got a source book or expansion book that was your world. And you then challenged me to put my money where my mouth was and said, "Oh, I bet you can't do Dune in D&D First Edition or whatever. It can't be
Yes,
done."
because I think I was kind of going, well, hold on, mate, because you've bought Traveller, which is okay. I mean, you can do a lot with Traveller. I will grant you
Yeah,
that one. Traveller's an amazing system to do pretty much anything.
you say that, but the one thing it probably lacks is the very thing you were just lauding 2G20 for, which is the team aspect on a bridge.
Yeah. No.
I think there's I think there's
uh,
probably an element there that is probably missing from Traveller. Now you brought it up, but yeah, I
but
mean, you can do
I think
everything with
actually,
Traveller.
yeah, on a spaceship, I think lots of RPGs really suffer from
Yeah,
getting that team thing together, and
mm,
that's why I say 2D20 uh, 2D20 Star Trek Adventures should be lauded because that feels to me so right, particularly for
yeah.
bridge scenes. But it works in it. It just works like all Star Trek stories work, or at least post
Well, let's be
post
honest. A good
original series,
30,
because pretty
a good
much in
30,
the original
40
series,
percent.
Kirk solved everything, didn't he?
Yeah, but a good 30, 40% of a Star Trek episode is on the bridge, right?
Yes.
On a normal episode. So if you don't capture the element of the atmosphere of the bridge in Star Trek, then you've lost 30 to 40% of the whole feel,
Yeah.
you know. So,
Okay, so we're saying Traveller doesn't do that so well, but
no,
my point was, yes, Traveller is a great basic system for doing stuff, but in its own right, it was designed after D&D to be a
yeah,
role-playing game set in space, and it
yes,
had very different mechanics. For example, no classes, the
yeah,
wonderful character creation system that's about a particular sort of fiction that actually there was quite a lot of around that time about retired, shall we
yeah,
say,
and it still
spacemen
carries on.
investigating mysteries. And sorry, Andy?
So it still carries on, but the problem with it was the interesting thing about Traveller and D&D as well actually was that when they came out, there was precious little background for either. The original D&D backgrounds, the Greyhawk and what was the other one? Blackmore, I think it was Blackmore.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, those two backgrounds were incredibly sparse. Really, they were just here's a dungeon, off you go. By the way, maybe in a kingdom. That's about it. And with Traveller, I mean, the setting for Traveller was the Imperium, and all you got for that was the map of the Spinward Marches, and there you are. Um, so actually, that's a good point, but that's something we'll cover in a sec.
We'll touch that
So
in a moment. Yeah.
yeah, but the rest of the world generation was you as referee or DM or whatever you wanted to call it. That was you doing that. Yeah. It
Mhm.
wasn't until sort of the 80s more when you got games like Twilight or like uh, the more evolved versions of RuneQuest and so on, where you got a background pretty much built into the book, you know, that we started to see that divergence. And I think it went full cycle because by the time you got to the World of Darkness and things in the 90s, it was nearly 99% background and a very thin bit of rules in each book, which was, hey, this is how you play this game, but this is what it is. Yeah.
Yeah, and the thing that really annoyed me about, because we've recently been discussing on our Patreon exclusive Discord, which join our Patreon. I should have put that in the ticker tape. Maybe I'll make another one of those.
Subscribe
Um,
wherever it is. Yeah.
but we were talking about the inadequacies of the storyteller system, at least in its first edition.
Oh, it had a lot of problems.
But yeah, but my point was, well, each game is designed to do the thing which it's designed to do,
Yes.
which are kind of vampire superheroes. Forgive me for people who think they're not superheroes, but they bloody are. They're only monsters like they should be in fifth edition, but there we go.
I think you'll find there's an awful lot of comics that would support the idea of a vampire superhero, actually, Matt. So, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, so where am I going with this? Yeah, so they don't work together. So you tried to run. I remember a campaign. I was a mage.
Yeah.
Dave Webb was another mage. Somebody else was
Yeah.
a vampire.
We
Um,
had vampire. The only one I didn't do was Wraith because there was no way
who
of
wants to
getting
be
a.
a wraith?
Well, that's so depressing. They're circling the drain anyway. So it was like, but I did try and combine them all, and it kind of worked. The problem was that really you should have all hated each other.
Mm.
Uh, and if you didn't hate each other, then it was very bizarre. And also, the way that the different games, all the games were based on storyteller, but they were all significantly different. But it was very hard to work out if a mage was more or less powerful than a werewolf, or a
Well,
vampire was
and
more.
that's precisely it. That's what the point I was making. Well, of course, they're all designed so that the
There
the
was no
the
competition.
creature you are is the best thing in the world, be it a
Yeah,
vampire in vampire or a mage in mage, and so when they came together, they're their powers weren't necessarily compatible or measurable against one another, except
Uh,
mages rule. Don't you
yeah.
forget it.
Well, no, the thing was that it became very difficult to run because I was continuously juggling, different stats in different games.
Yeah,
And the other thing was that really it was against the spirit of each individual game, as you say, because they were meant to be, your mages the best. And then
yeah.
along comes this Samichi vampire or something, and he thinks he's the best, and it just didn't
And I
mix well.
think, if I remember rightly, that actually it turned out that werewolves are the best.
They certainly are, yes.
Yeah.
I think they were built to be combat machines and not much else, and they certainly are combat machines and not much else. So yeah, at least that's
Anyway,
first.
so this is all background to the fact that we have these arguments all the
We
time,
did.
Andy and I, and for that reason, I said, well, every game system is designed to do the thing it's designed to do. So Traveller does Traveller, and if you like, Mark Miller and the gang said, well, we can't play space adventures with D&D, so let's write our own rules. So I challenged you to
Yeah.
find yourself a copy of first edition D&D and make a Dune game out of D&D.
Well, I didn't find a copy of first edition D&D.
And so you failed, right? That's the end of
Yeah,
the
that
discussion.
was
No,
the end of that wager. But no, I got a copy of basic D&D from my archive in the loft. In fact, it is this red book of Dungeons and Dragons. Uh,
excellent. Which is I'm a little bit
Still
older
have the
vintage D&D than that one. Yeah,
the old
yeah.
one with. I don't actually remember buying this. I was actually somewhat surprised. I thought the earliest version I had was AD&D, and I don't actually remember ever owning this, but I obviously do. So there you go. But it's basically D&D. It goes up to level 3, I think. And it's the original, well, not the original, but as near as you can get, 1981 version of D&D. 1980, in fact, it says copyright on the front. So 3 years past or 5 years past the original D&D, something like that. So
We just have to correct my co-host David, who's watching the program. Hey, David, do you want to join us? If you drop us a comment, if you want to join us, I'll send a link to you. But
I like his logo actually, the cowboy there.
he's
Uh,
had that for blooming years.
Well, it somewhat goes against his Tales of the Old West theme in a way. A skeletal cowboy. Anyway, never mind. So yeah, I mean, I found the rule set, and I thought, right, I'm not going to let you get away with that. I'm not having any of that. I will try and do something. So I did. And then I both won and lost the wager in my mind. And the reason why I won and lost the wager is as
Very
follows.
fair, because I think
I
that
won
too.
it because the first or second draft was actually very close to the D&D rules, and I was actually very happy with that. And I thought, well, that proves the point to some extent. And I had levels and classes and all the stuff that makes D&D D&D. Although I'd renamed some of the classes and I changed a few things, it was still levels,
I
hit
want to talk
points.
about that in a moment when we get into the detail.
Yeah.
But carry on.
And then I fell into the very trap that you'd laid for me, sir. And I began to. We love you, really, Dave. Occasionally, if you pay us enough. But no, I fell into the very trap you laid for me in that I then began uber tailoring the modifications. And I ended up with something that wasn't actually very D&D. So I kind of got where I should have been to win the wager and should have stopped there and gone, there we go, I win.
Yeah.
And then I went further than that and went, actually, you know what? You win. So I'm prepared to concede the field on the third draft of this, but I still think the second draft was my point
Yeah, but it's the
in
third draft you've sent me, isn't it? Let me just
yes,
check.
but I don't actually have the second draft anywhere anymore because obviously I edited it and didn't keep it. So
Ah, well, I think you will find it somewhere in the Discord because that's where it is.
I wasn't going to go back through all that. Probably.
I'm just making sure that did you put a version number on it actually? Because I'm not sure which one I've got
Probably
here.
not. No,
I've
but
opened them both up today.
if it says D&Dune or something as the title, then it's the third version because I changed it then. I was
No,
originally.
it's still the Golden Path.
In that case, you might have the second version. Hang on.
I think though it's the third version because the characteristic
Oh,
adjustment table didn't
no,
exist in the second
third
version.
version, yeah.
Yeah.
I think I'm confusing myself. The reason why I chose the Golden Path is that, as Dune fans will know, that's Duke Leto's, sorry, the God Emperor Duke Leto, not the original Leto, his view of the future and how things should unfold. And it seemed like a good name. And then I sort of got part of it and changed it. But anyway,
Particularly if you're going to be a winner, then it is a good name. Sadly,
yeah.
though, as you've already said, you're a loser, so
Well,
you might as well
I
call
think
it.
I would have lost. I think I am Schrodinger's wager here because it's both a win and a lose, and I'm just not going to collapse it. So what I did, just to summarise this, because I don't think we need to go into it in massive detail, but
I
what
want
I
to go
did,
into it in some massive detail, but yeah, summarize it first.
I said, okay, what makes D&D D&D? And the basic thing is obviously classes and hit points and saving throws and spells and all that. And I thought, all right, so can we take the basic classes and convert them into things in the Dune universe? And to some extent, you can. You can say a Fremen is a fighter, or a Mentat, or a Bene Gesserit, whatever, is a witch of some kind, or mage, or whatever, magic user. That's the word I'm looking for. So there was some overlap there, and it would have been possible just to take D&D as it was and just rename things and so on. But I thought, okay, now I'm going to go a bit further. So I think I ended up with, I don't know how many there are actually. There are like 9 or so classes.
Oh, I've just clicked away from the thing. Um,
Yeah,
one, two,
I've got it in
three,
front of me.
four, five, six, seven, 8, 9, 10. The magic
10.
10 classes.
Okay, well, I've got 10 classes then. And I, most of them are derivatives of basic classes, but I kind of combined all of them into one in a way. So those classes all represent key elements in the book. So you have Bene Gesserit, you have Bremen, you have a sort of liegeman like Gurney Halleck, you have a Mentat, a Sook Doctor, whatever. And the idea was to use those classes as a way of providing some sort of flavor to the character generation system. So you weren't just a fighter, you were a Sook Doctor or whatever. And this is where I fell into your trap, because this is where I'm starting to tailor the rule system more and more for the background. Okay, so
Yeah, yeah,
bear,
yeah.
just bear with me. And then I looked at the spell system and I came up with Bene Gesserit abilities and whatever, which, you know, things like the petite perception and things like that, which effectively are new spells. Now, I maintain that writing new spells for a background or whatever isn't actually changing the rules, because I think the spells in D&D are actually just a background of a type, because they set a flavor. Yeah. If you have, I don't know, Bigby's Crushing Hand or something, you're playing a Greyhawk style D&D, right?
Mm.
If you have, you know, Fireball or whatever, well, that's a sort of generic spell that doesn't really, do you know what I mean? It doesn't really give you any background as such.
Yeah, although interestingly, in Forbidden Lands, which we enjoy, you don't. You're not a Forbidden Lands player, but the rest of us in our happy little community really like Forbidden Lands. But lots of people criticise it because it's got no fireball spell, and I think it has now in the latest edition. But back then,
I
people were going, "Where's fireball? Fireball's a staple of
Well,
fantasy role playing."
it's meant to be an homage to those older systems with a newer system, isn't it? So I'd
Yeah,
have thought
yeah.
they would have paid some sort of lip service to Fireball. But anyway, it doesn't matter. So, yeah, so I then kept tailoring it from there on in. And what I've ended up with, which has cost me precisely 0 pence and £0, as it were, apart from my time in Word or whatever, is
But
a
you're saying
this.
£45 less than the
Well, I mean, my
Modiphius
time's not
system.
worth much anyway, is it? So I mean, you know, so it's arguable. In fact, I probably owe myself for the time. But anyway, yeah. So it's basically the nucleus of a system to play gin. Now, here's the thing. As I said to you, I think it depends on the amount of knowledge you have of the background and the games master in particular.
Mm.
And I'm not going to say anything about me as a games master, but I do know a fair amount of about gin. And I thought that, you know, what I've really done here is pour that knowledge out of my head into a D&D shaped vessel and come up with something that is playable, I hope. Um, but I don't think that the average buyer of the Dune game at the time, but partly because also you know, they either don't. The whole Dune thing, because of the way it's been marketed with the film, is rather like the Alien thing in my head, where it's pulling in people who maybe haven't role played before. So it's using the power of the franchise to pull people in, you know. And I feel that therefore a lot of people who ordered Dune may well be first time role players, and they wouldn't have done this anyway. Right? It's fairly immediately obvious they wouldn't have done this. So from that point of view, I don't think that this really is comparable because I think what the Dune RPG from Modiphius is doing is acting as a gateway game, just like Alien acts as a gateway game, right, to some extent. Because everyone, they see the movie, they go, okay, I now want the model kit, I want the role playing book or the novelization or whatever. Whereas this is more the way that someone 30 years ago would have done it and has said, oh, well, I have D&D and I want to play Dune and I'm not going to spend £40 on a rule book when I've got D&D. It's that sort of thing. And you know me well enough to know that when I looked at Coriolis or Alien, okay, you got me to buy Alien and Coriolis. I have those. But anyway, but when I looked at them
I'm
originally,
great at
I,
selling games. Freely, you
yeah,
owe me.
well,
That's a fiver each of those you owe me as well.
it's racking up. You should keep a counter in the corner of the screen here somewhere, actually.
Yeah.
But every time we you mentioned, oh, Coriolis or Alien, I went, well, I can do that with Traveller. I can do that with Traveller. And whether I can or not is irrelevant. The point is that I felt that I could. And I have 40 years back catalogue of Traveller stuff, and I didn't really want to, although you managed to get me to do it. Um, on other stuff. So I have the Alien book is sitting behind me somewhere there. I've never run it, I've never played it, but I own it, so it's a sale, so that's all that matters. But yeah, and this is the
But
thing.
I
I
think your
think it's
point, just touching on Alien, I think that is a really good point. That Alien has appealed to a whole bunch of people who have not been playing role playing games for
yeah,
40 years or any years at all. And so it's got to do a degree of heavy lifting and it's got to feel to a GM's first game, it's got to feel like Alien. And I think, the way they've tweaked the Year Zero system for that really does. And, it'll be interesting to borrow Dave's copy when he's bought it and see whether Modiphius's 2D20 tweaks and its 5D20 dice packs are somehow magically transforming 2D20 system into something that feels like Dune. But let's come
does
back to your. We're talking
he
about
get
your
a PDF
achievements
of
here.
the game? Because if he does, he can send that to us for review purposes.
I'm not sure they've had a PDF yet. The
But
pre-order
not.
customers.
Oh, okay.
No. I can't remember when, but I'm pretty sure we had this discussion on the Patreon exclusive Discord. Check out our ribbon down there if you want to join the Patreon exclusive Discord. Um, uh, but I don't think it's come out yet. I think it might be out at the end of the month or something like that.
I think it might be the beta test, um, uh, NDA group only for Dune or something like that. I don't know because it's not actually a Kickstarter, is it? It's a pre-launch, pre-order type thing where you sign up for a beta and sign an NDA, and then your group can run it and all that sort of thing.
Hmm.
But yeah, I mean, so I think our argument actually boils down not to a difference in opinion in terms of how rulebooks and things should be laid out, but different eras because I'm effectively doing things in the 70s, 80s, and maybe early 90s way of doing it, and you are effectively doing things in the modern way of doing it. You millennial, you. um, but no, you are doing it in the free league style or other way of doing it, cult or whatever, where the background of the rules are all part of the same thing. And I think it's an era thing because I almost a nostalgia thing because there was a degree of interest and or um, enjoyment to be gained from building your own world in the older versions of the books. Yes, you should have, Thomas. I'm sorry, but that's a fiver you owe me. Never mind Matt. In fact, Matt can go a fiver down, and I will go a fiver up for that. But yeah, I mean, so I think it is a sort of difference from a perspective based on where you're standing in history with role playing, and It's that sort of thing. It's world building in the 80s as opposed to getting it all on a plate now, which is kind of what happens. Um, and I'm a builder. So to me, it makes perfect sense that I get a set of rules and I go, oh, what can I do with this? I'll build something. Whereas maybe, it doesn't make sense to other people and they want something that's pre-done that they can just grab and go with, just like you would get, I don't know, a different game off the shelf and play that, and it's there and set up and ready to go.
Yeah, I
So
think there's a thing. I've just mistyped something. I think there's a thing about when we were kids, we could only afford the one system,
yeah,
ish, or a few. And now you and I aren't working right now, but
well, yeah, but no, I mean,
you've got a contract starting next week, and I've got
yeah,
to start looking for a job now.
yes,
But we have been relatively flush, and
yeah.
so we've bought a lot. Well, no, actually, you haven't. You skinflint.
No,
You only buy new
no,
systems when I sell them to you.
that's not true. I bought Mason, and you didn't tell me that, or person, or however Dave says it. I bought Twilight, and I sold myself that. In fact, all
Right?
you had to mention was Twilight is coming out. You mentioned 3 words, I think, and I think my response was beep, yeah, and buy it. There we go.
It wasn't even. I can't remember. It was lovely though because I gave you a clue and you guessed it was Twilight 2000, and then I
I did,
couldn't confirm it.
yeah. But I looked at the picture and I thought actually it was a redo of Recon. That's what I originally
Yeah,
thought.
yeah.
It reminded me of a picture I saw on the Recon dust jacket or whatever a long, long time ago. And I thought, oh, they're doing Recon again. Okay, fair enough. And then I thought, no, maybe it's Twilight. That looks like a Russian tank type thing in the background there or whatever, or helicopter, whatever it was. So I put that. So yeah. And then I sold myself on it. And then I think I became their most ardent voice for the Kickstarter on the Discord by going, it's over 9,000, it's going to go to, or whatever. Oh, Dave. I don't speak Swedish. I don't care. I'm sorry.
Now we have
um,
20 minutes though. I'm going to come back, draw us back online, and talk
Please
about
do.
your version of D and Dune or Dune and D or whatever it is, or the Golden Path, which works quite
I think we
well.
should stick to the path, actually. Maybe we'll go
Yeah.
back to that.
And then for it also avoids all sorts of trademark issues with the people that actually own the Dune trademark.
Possibly the D&D trademark. I don't know. But yeah. Uh,
Okay, the first thing I wanted to touch on is your first paragraph is, in general, we only use the original Dune universe, Dune Messiah, Children of Dune, God Emperor of Dune, Heretics of Dune, Chapter House Dune, as well as the semi-canon Dune
yeah.
Encyclopedia.
Right.
I
Okay.
now
Let's
I've
cover
only
that.
read Dune, so tell me what
Right.
the difference is.
Frank Herbert wrote 6 books, which are the books you just listed, and he had semi-completed stories for other Dune works or whatever, but he only actually put his name to everything up to Chapter House of Dune, as far as I understand it. All right. The Dune Encyclopedia, which was conveniently around but seems to have disappeared, but the Dune Encyclopedia is an independent work which he sanctioned, but he didn't write. He wrote in the foreword, yep, this is great, but I'm going to keep some mysteries to myself, and this might not be 100% right. Yeah, which is fair enough. He was the author. So that to me is Dune. That is everything, that was the core nucleus of the books from sort of the early 60s or whenever Dune was originally published, right up to the mid 80s when Frank Herbert passed away. And then you get about 20 series of books, which I feel are cash-in attempts, which are the Prelude to Dune, the Legend of Dune, the Hunters of Dune, the Sandworms of Dune. I mean, I call them Shannara books. And the reason why I call them Shannara books is because Terry Brooks has milked the Shannara franchise so much with yet another trilogy of something of Shannara, that this feels the same way. And they're also terrible. I wouldn't mind the cash-in attempt if they were actually well written or had anything to do with the feel of the original Dune, which is Dune to me was originally a mystical book, not a science fiction book. It's very into its
Hmm.
It's sort of mystical, come way of thinking, come
Yeah,
60s,
absolutely, absolutely.
whatever. And these books were just terribly written, poorly done action things, which had no bearing on the original feel of the books or anything at all. Um, so
Okay, so that's was all I was wanting from you is
yeah,
because I've not, as I say, I've only read Dune. Um, yeah, I had no idea how bad they are. You've convinced me. I don't need to read them. If I was going
no,
to read one other book apart from Dune from your selected canon, which should that be?
I would actually suggest you read two, and that would be Dune Messiah and Children of Dune, the second and third sequel, as it were, or the second whatever book. The reason why is because I think they pretty much cover the whole story cycle of Paul Atreides. And at the end of Children of Dune, he's effectively out of the picture entirely. And that really is the end of his cycle, if you like. Everything that follows that is a bit less um, his story. Well, it refers back to him, but he's not part of it anymore. In fact, he sort of disappears, if memory serves, halfway through Dune Messiah, and then it's hinted at that he's there in the background in the books beyond that point. So that's a kind of spoiler. But yeah, the first three books anyway.
Okay, so let's get into the meat of your D&D adaptation now, and I'm looking at characters. Well, I'm looking at
Right.
character generation to begin with. 3d6
Mm-hmm. D&D.
rolled in order. Is this? You haven't specified this.
No, I don't
In
think you need.
order or get 6 scores and assign them? I
Oh,
mean, apart from
I
intelligence and
think
wisdom.
I think you can do it any way you want, and this is more of a suggestion, really. There are plenty of ways of die rolling at the D&D. I'm sure I wasn't about to list them all. So if you want to do
Okay.
them in order, do them in order. If you want to take the maximum, take the maximum. I did, however, I don't know if it has it in the version I gave you, but I did say 2d6 plus 6 for intelligence and wisdom. Uh, yes. Anyway, moving on. Um, so yeah, I did that because I figured that having a 3 intelligence or a 3 wisdom for a game that's all about um,
Hmm.
intelligence and wisdom and mystical things seemed to be a bit detrimental. So
Okay.
I
Okay. So let's just focus on this little detail here. Basic D&D doesn't say start with 6 and do 2d10, 2d6
no, it doesn't.
on those
So
two stats.
this is my point, right? As
So
I
this
said,
is
you
so
started to
just
go
let me
off piece here.
clarify for me here. This is how you're adapting the system to better
Yes,
reflect the world
I
of
have
the.
already conceded the field. All right, you can gloat, but I've already conceded the field. So I have fallen into your trap, like I said, and there will be more of those.
Okay.
Um,
Okay.
thank you, Dave. I agree entirely with that. Um, so yeah, so yeah, I did do 2d6 plus 6. Okay, it's a tweak, but I will get on to the difference. I think actually
Okay.
between building a rule system for a background and house rules in a moment, but that's a different thing. Um, yeah. So I then came up with a characteristic adjustment table, which we don't have to go into great detail out, but it's basically modifying various things by your characteristics. So your strength modifies your damage, your constitution modifies your hit points, and so on.
Yeah, this is
So
an interesting thing that I've seen in modern fifth edition D&D, or rather, I've seen it in D&D players. There's a box for your stat and a box for your modifier. But I noticed that as an old school D&D'er, I put my stat in a slightly bigger box and my modifier in a slightly smaller box. Modern players just put their modifier in the big box because that's the one they want to see really clearly, and they put their stat, which is just some pointless vestigial tale
there's
of
an argument.
D&D.
Yeah, you only really need the modifier. Actually, there is an
You do,
argument.
yeah.
Now, the stat is actually once you've rolled it and got your modifier, you don't actually go back to the stat, do you? In D&D, I don't know, but um,
Well, I
I
think a
sort
whole
of
bunch of OSR systems actually do say, right, let's strip out the stat, just deal with
yeah,
the modifiers.
you don't use it. Yeah, so basically, I then looked at modifying various things. So I collapsed all the attribute tables into one modifier table to make it simple. Right?
Mhm.
That I don't think is unreasonable because D&D has loads of modifiers and then loads of racial modifiers. And bear in mind, we got rid of everything but
Yes. Whereas there are only humans in this adventure, aren't there? Yeah.
yeah. So
So
I
this is
collapsed.
another adaptation you made to the system to make it better reflect the world.
I'm just going to grin and be quiet.
Okay, carry on. Carry on.
So I then looked at saving throws and so on. Now I did change the saving throws as well because obviously there's no magical spells or wands or whatever in Dune, so it made more sense to keep the disease poison saving throw, but maybe change the others.
Mhm.
Uh, and these are based on your constitution, so they're basically saving throws versus your constitution. Cheap political joke. That's what the USA needs to do right now: is a saving throw versus its constitution. But anyway, um,
I think it needs to
anyway,
make a Constitution saving throw, doesn't it?
yeah, that's basically it. Um, but anyway, um, so basically there are four saving throws, and one special for Sook doctors because they have a limit
So
of.
saving throw versus poison and disease, saving throw versus spice,
Yeah,
saving throw versus Bene Gesserit.
well, I called it Bene Gesserit, but really it's mental powers. But the Bene Gesserit are the only ones who really have a range of mental powers.
Don't the
Spacing,
Bene Gesserit have a word for their mental powers?
they do, but well, they have
It's
several
a
words. It's the
sorry.
voice and it's the voice and things like that.
Oh, for each power.
Yeah, so they have truth saying, which is their ability to tell if you're lying, which is based on their concept of perception monitoring, right, and things like that. They have their ability to use the voice to control people and to influence them in whatever way. They have their ability to transmogrify, transmutate the water of death to the water of life and all that. So there are several things, but the reason why I call it saving throw versus Bene Gesserit and not saving throw versus a range of powers was just simply for convenience because they
Right.
all came under Bene Gesserit. So,
So you're saying the Bene Gesserit, which are the Jedi of the Dune universe, don't have
well,
the Force or a word
no,
like that.
yeah, but they have a variety of powers. So I thought, okay, Bene Gesserit will do for now. Saving throw versus spice, that had to be separate for Bene Gesserit because spice is encountered by pretty much everyone in the game.
Mhm.
Uh, and therefore, I didn't want to tie it into the Bene Gesserit particularly. And also, I felt that I really think that melange is really a very thin um, disguise for LSD, actually.
Right.
Uh,
Yes, I think you're probably right. I think Frank
I
Herbert
think
spends a lot of
that's
time
where
in the
it came
desert doing LSD, didn't he? I think
from,
that's
or mushrooms or something. It's
yeah.
psilocybin or LSD or something. And therefore, I thought it should be kept separate because I think it was basically he uses spice to induce, you know, extrasensory perception and other things. I think he was using the analogy of LSD expanding your mind, man,
Hmm.
and all that.
Being able to
So
fold space.
yes, exactly. So I think there's a analogy there. So I made it a separate thing. And then the last thing I did was the limiter one, like I said, which is for the Sook doctor. But I did something different with that because that's actually a conditioner that stops you being violent as a doctor. It's meant to so you keep your medical oath, but do no harm. Um, and unlike all the other saving throws, which decrease with level, just like D&D normally, I had that one increase with level because I figured as you became more experienced as a Sook doctor, it became more ingrained and your
Mhm.
limiter would be more and more prevalent as you did things. So I did it the other way around with that, which I thought was a nice twist. But anyway,
But that's another
uh,
variation from D&D that better fits the setting.
can we just have you hold up a flag every time you're going to do that? It would save so much
Okay.
time.
That can be arranged. Give me a moment.
Just a little side like, I win, I win, I win. Right? Keep a point. Do like a point score in the corner or something. Anyway, and then I took all the thief skills, which is going to be your next change. So to get your flag ready.
Okay.
And I made them available to everyone because I figure everyone can climb. I figure everyone can try and hide in shadows or move silently or whatever. So I did that. And then we get on to classes really after that.
Okay.
Uh,
So let's talk through classes here because these are not fighter, mage, and thingamabob.
oh,
And I was hoping I'd be able to play a fighter in Arrakis on Arrakis.
you still can. They're
Okay.
just
So
not
if I want
quite.
to play a fighter on Arrakis, which is the fancy name that I should choose?
Swordmaster, I think it comes under more than anything else.
Swordmaster. Yes. My
That's your
favourite
Duncan
character, of course, was played by my favourite actor, who hasn't changed a day since he made that film many, many years ago, and that's Patrick Stewart.
Yeah, that was Gurney Halleck though, and he wasn't the Swordmaster. Duncan Idaho is the Swordmaster.
Duncan Idaho is the Swordmaster, right?
Yeah,
Who's
Gurney
Gurney
Halleck.
Halleck then?
No, he's a liegeman. The Swordmaster is Duncan Idaho. If you watch the
Okay,
sequence,
okay then. So we're coming back to fighter here.
yeah,
What's a liegeman?
a liegeman is a guy who is assigned to the house. So that can either be your basic grunt in the uniform or whatever, or it can be a guy like Gurney Halleck who is assigned to the house but isn't actually a swordsmaster or whatever. He has a sort of attachment to the house anyway. So
Okay,
he's a loyal.
so like a normal fighter then.
Yeah. But the Swordmaster, Duncan Idaho, was specifically a Swordsmaster. He was the guy who gave Paul Atreides the training in swords and all the rest of it, with the shield thing at the beginning of the film. So,
Okay, what if I want to play a ranger? Which one do I choose?
Rangers aren't in basic D&D, Matt. Basic
Oh,
D&D is fighters, magic users, and thieves. Oh, and
that's it.
elves, which
And elves.
kind of,
Yes, because
yeah,
they were a class
they
of
had their own
elven.
class, sort of, yeah. So
Okay,
I'm
so if I
afraid
wanted to play an elf, who do I use?
I don't think you do play an elf, do you? Because there are no elves in Dune.
If I wanted to play something like an elf,
I suppose you could always play a friend with extra pointy ears. I don't know. It's more Bene Gesserit, I guess, actually. But yeah, I'm not going to go down the path of trying to be whatever. No, okay. Swordakar, I made monsters for a very good reason.
you made
Um,
Swordicart monsters.
yes, and there's a
Okay,
reason.
right.
If you
What is the
read
reason?
if you read the books, you never hear a Swordakar. Thank you, Matt. You never see a Swordakar speak, interact, or do anything but fight, or stand
Okay,
around looking like they're ready to fight. There's never like a leader of the Swordakar who stands around and says, "Well, I'm commander in chief of the Swordakar," or what. They're just soldiers. That's it, right? They're never. There's nothing to them. So I thought, well, I don't really want them to be a class because there isn't anything. Ixion I'll cover in a moment because we did do that. Um,
we've got
but
7 minutes, so we've got quite a lot to cover.
yeah, okay. Well, let's just cover those. Swordakar I made monsters. Ixions. I didn't cover Ixions in particular, but I did face dancers. Which are the only sort of visible front of the Ixians you ever really encounter in the books. You don't actually meet, as far as I'm aware, unless it's in the expanded Junk universe, an Ixian. What you actually meet in all of Frank Herbert's books is a face dancer, and there's one
The
called
face
Skytail.
dancer being the Tialaxu face dancer.
Yes, and they are specially adapted people who can mimic other people by changing their appearance through genetics and training and all sorts of things. So they are actually non-human. In that they are so
So
modified
that's
from
who I
basic.
am if I want to play an elf, right?
If you want to be a human with pointy ears, you can make yourself look like you've got pointy ears. And thank you very much for the banner again. Oh god. Anyway, so yeah, so there's that. So yeah, in the expanded world we do, Thomas, but
Yeah, we've already had a discussion about the expanded world, haven't we,
in the
Thomas?
paragraph I put at the beginning, god damn it, I said no expanded universe. So yeah, so the face dancers you do see, and they are a worthwhile class to have, I thought, because they have this ability to mimic others, and it's a good power to express as a class thing. And the rest of the classes, I don't know if the version you have has this, but I had a basic human table, and then I
Yes.
scaled that, so that was just higher level basic humans, which
Cool.
really
No,
I don't.
let's rush on because that's kind of boring, and I can't use my banner for any of that.
And then I had the classes modify that, so we have all the classes, so that's that. And then the next thing I did,
Spells.
yes, abilities I called them because rather than
Well, yes,
spells.
because
Well,
they're not spells, are they? No.
well, they
You
are
couldn't
and they
have
are.
spells, really,
Well, they
could you?
are. Okay, put your banner up. Ah, right, so spells then. Um, they are just the powers. So
Mhm.
with the Bene Gesserit, for example, Bene Gesserit have abilities to do a truth saying and unmask a face dancer and all that sort of thing. So I did them as powers or spells or whatever. And then I just assign them to levels. So there's nothing particularly magical about that, he says, unintended. Um, but they are literally just mental powers or things of that ilk.
Okay, but if I'm playing a Bene Gesserit, how do I? So D&D has got a very specific magic system, basic D&D especially, where you have to remember your spells and you put them in your spell list, and then as soon as you've cast them, you forget the spell, like they did in Fantasy and Magic.
Yeah, well, I scrapped the forget the spell bit, so you
Oh,
put your banner up for
hold
that.
on, it's got the forget the spell bit. Okay, well, yeah, carry on.
Sorry, Matt. Sorry, Sally's in the background. Um, and I made them just general abilities.
There it is.
So
Look, giant tread falling down the back.
yeah, I'm live, by the way.
Okay, all right.
So yeah, we had various abilities and spells, and I then just assigned them to levels, and you choose them when you generate your character, and then from that you go to uh, just use them in the game. So with your level 1 Bene Gesserit, you get one level 1 ability. You take that to be petite perception or whatever, and it's the same as the magic user learning a simple spell or whatever. So yes.
Cool.
Anyway.
My favorite thing in Dune is the armor and the slow knife thing. So how does that work?
Well, two ways. First of all, the reason why that's in Dune in its entirety, just to be very quick about it, was to re-establish the need for people to have sword fights,
Swords.
right?
Yep.
Right, because one of the things that Frank
That's
Herbert
what I
was
like
very
about it. That is what I like
yeah,
about it.
is that he didn't like the high-tech science thing where you press a button and someone dies 100 miles away, because that ruined all the tension of his books. He wanted people to actually be, So the Holtzman shield, the idea is where it slows things down and its extension to other things as well, is a brilliant idea because it means fast-moving energy weapons and bullets and all that stuff don't work anymore, or at least don't work the way you want them to, and you have to go back to older ways of doing things, right? So I'm still working on that bit, actually, if you look at the tables, but I looked
Is
at
it going to be like armor class?
Yes, with the extension that if you hit
Extension is that?
okay, if you ever have a feeling you dug yourself down a hole that you can't see daylight anymore? so far.
Tell me about the extension. I won't use a banner anymore, having used it the one
I
time.
think you've done your point now. I did say that version 3 of this, I'd fallen into your trap, so I set the scene. But the extension is that if you hit, just as in the book, if you hit a Holtzman shield with a laser weapon, it tends to kill you and the person firing the laser weapon because of the way it's meant to work. Um, so it's much better to use a sword or a knife and do it slow and all that. And then you get these things called slow bullets that sort of drill through the shield and things like that. So it's more of a focus on hand-to-hand, on armed melee combat, and less of a focus on ranged combat because that isn't really going to help you here. And I think
That's why I can't be a ranger.
Well, you couldn't be anyway, Matt. It's not in the book. Where's my banner?
No, that's fine. No, I'm not bringing the banner.
That's not in the book, Matt. But no. So I started to focus on the hand-to-hand and the melee aspects because basically that's pretty much what you see in the book and the film, even the original 1984 film. Even in the sci-fi version at the beginning of the millennium, you saw the slow stuff and whatever. So that I thought was important. And I'm still looking at that. And then the rest of my little attempt at Dune is a glossary and a map, if I remember correctly. Maybe a couple of.
Well, the monsters. You did have some monsters, and I can't find them.
Oh no, there was experience, wasn't there, as well?
Experience, yeah.
I thought it was very against the idea of Dune to have experience of what we're just killing things because that's not what Dune's about yet. So I started doing an XP system that was different.
Yes, and this is more like the sort of XP system we see in
and practically every
Coriolis
game
or whatever. Yeah. Not Traveller, of course, because Traveller doesn't have an XP system.
Well, it does. It has adventure tallies, which are
Yeah.
somewhat different. But anyway, never
Well, it
mind
does
that.
nowadays.
Well, that was Mega Traveller, so I'd say from the 80s onwards, actually, Matt. But there you go. So yeah, so I did an XP system. The monsters are actually very much more like D&D monsters. They have an
Mm.
armor class.
Well, I was going to compliment you on how they look like monster stat blocks. I mean, I haven't
Yeah,
analysed each one, but they do look
no,
like
but they
monster
are.
stat blocks.
They do actually. They have D8s for hit dice. I haven't done anything particularly amazing with them. I haven't done the write-ups for them yet. Anyway, um, I was going to have several sizes of sandworm, starting at the small one, which is called a sand trout, right up to the big thing you see in the movie trailer or whatever. And there are some other things I was going to throw in there. So the sort of car were basically fantasy monsters because I didn't really like them as a class,
Mm-hmm.
and so on and so forth. I also wanted third stage guild navigators, which, if you remember the original 1984 film, is one of the classic things in that where you see this big sort of
Yeah, I
shaky
love that. I love
right?
that.
That is in no way a player character. It has to be
No,
moved around a gigantic tank. It's sealed in there.
but
It
that is the
only
character I would play. You know me.
yes, yes, obviously. But I seem to remember you've done something similar like that in Traveller already, where you
Yeah,
control the whole thing.
exactamundo.
Yeah, so I was going to make them a sort of monster, but I really didn't see any way that players would ever interact with it other than some form of patron, to be honest. Because how do you interact with something that's in a massive tank with an army of people supporting it all the time? You know, it's not really even an NPC, really.
Yeah.
Uh, and then there was the hunter killer as well, which I had to put in there because it's such a cool little thing, and it is just perfectly tuned, really. Um,
Perfectly Dune. Perfectly Dune, did
yeah,
you say? Perfectly Dune.
perfectly tuned.
So I'm doing it in the American way.
Yeah, I know.
Anyway,
I know I was going to do a list of NPCs, which I haven't pushed out at all. I had a glossary, which is three quarters done, maybe
now
a lot of work.
to be properly D&D, those NPCs would have to disobey the rules and have an amazing number of hit points or whatever,
Well,
like in the
I
old school
already was going
D&D.
to do that anyway because Paul Atreides was going to be the one that was going to be multi-classed, which is legal in later versions of D&D, but not in basic D&D as far as I'm aware. So he
Mhm.
would have been your fighter, magic user, thief, all singing, all dancing, Kwisatz, Haderach, whatever. Um, but the others, yeah, I was going to sort of beef them up a little, but I wasn't going to do anything that outlandish with them.
So anyway, I've got to say this is a great piece of work, Andy, and
Oh,
I challenged you because I didn't think you'd be able to do it. And what you've done is do it. I mean, you've made my point for me, of
yes,
course. My point
yes,
being, what's my point again? Yes, that's my point.
yes. Like I said, I went too far. I should have, in a way, I should have just done a little pamphlet that said, "This
Stuck
is
with
what you do."
0.2.
Yeah,
But I mean, it's a thing, isn't it? It's, I mean, basically what you're talking about is you could argue these are house rules on top of D&D.
no, I wouldn't. That is exactly what I wouldn't do. That's what I was
Okay.
going to say. Let's take Symbaroum, right? Because this
Hmm.
is a game that's relatively recent, and you know I've house modified, right, or changed. I haven't changed a jot of the background of Symbaroum. The only real things I've done are I've changed some things with the rule system to make GM roll dice and a couple of other tweaks that I felt were more in line with the background. Right, I made corruption slower, for example. Okay, I let the GM roll dice because hey, you say the GM is a player too, so you know. Um, so I did things like that, but they are all tweaks. They don't really. Okay, they're not pure canon Symbaroum. Obviously, they're changes to the rules. Yeah, but the whole point of Symbaroum is it has loads of optional rules in it anyway. Uh, so the point was to convert Symbaroum to slightly better reflect how I wanted to play it without actually breaking it or changing the background or whatever. That is what I mean by house rules. They are just a
Okay.
way of playing Symbaroum, right? This is way beyond that. This Dune thing is, well, here's D&D, and here's what we're doing, right?
So
Which is,
you've done a D&D Dune hack, shall we
yeah,
say?
I
Yeah.
think that's probably more appropriate, right? I wouldn't
Mhm.
call this house building something. A house rule is like when you say in, I don't know, in Coriolis or something, where you say, "Wow, I've got so many darkness points, I can actually do this or whatever." Right? That's to me is a house rule. It's a small tweak. Yeah. Whereas this is a wide scale, full blown thing. So yeah. So thank you for the compliment. I do appreciate that. I think I took our wager somewhat too far. I don't think I will be doing this with other wagers with you in the future so much.
Well, it's okay.
Especially if I
I'm
think
planning on, when I have a massive publishing empire, just occasionally saying to you, I bet you couldn't do that. And then you'll deliver
yes,
that, and I'll just run it through the photocopier and 45
off we
quid
go.
down. We're done.
Yes. Um, well, I did think that I might be setting myself a precedent, and the next thing you'd say is, "I bet you can't do, I don't know, John Carter with RuneQuest or something or whatever," and I'd be doing that. Um,
Hmm.
oh, don't. So yeah, I did kind of shoot myself in the foot, but then I enjoy building worlds, and even when it's someone else's world, and I'm just putting rules to it. So that's fine by me.
Even when somebody else has written a perfectly good rule set that they're going to sell for 45 quid.
Yeah, but then this was never Visage as being a product, was it? This was a wager between you and me,
And we
really.
should make that point clear. This isn't going to be available to anybody who joins the Discord or anything like that. It's not a free giveaway. I just want to make sure that Modifius and the IP holders for Dune are. This is just us talking about a thing you've done. I tried to stop him, guys. He did it on his. He did it on his own accord. Nothing
We
to
are
do with
not
me.
doing this. We are not doing this for public release. We are not doing this as a commercial product or whatever, and we certainly aren't challenging any IP holders because no. So yeah, that's basically it. But this is a wager between you and me, and I feel that I both won and lost it, as I said. Oh, Randy, I will do you a special edition.
No,
The Prince.
don't say that on here.
No, I won't. I'm joking. But yeah, so I don't know. I mean, it's a stupid thing, really. Is when you build your own world. Um, it's obviously yours. You can sell it or whatever. But when you build someone else's world, you are then unable to do anything with it. Even if you do a really good job of it or a really bad job of it, it doesn't matter. It's then something that you sits there and you might be able to sell if you get the rights or whatever. So it's
Yeah.
you do it for the enjoyment of your own group more than anything else, I think. So I did this really as an exercise in world building and to basically spite you, to be honest, Matt. So
Yeah,
I mean, there you go.
I realise that. I realise you are only doing it to spite me.
Indeed.
But I'd like to think you've spited yourself because you've now promised yourself that you're never going to do it again. So I win.
Not entirely, because you did say you'd play it.
Oh yes. Okay. Yeah, I did say that.
Yeah. So
We'll need to get some more players, but shall we play this game and shall we stream it? Do you have a scenario ready?
I do have a sort of scenario ready. It's called Memories of Dune.
Is it? Don't tell me about it. Don't spoil it. Is it going to be ready before your Twilight 2000 scenario?
Well, they're both kind of at the same stage of readiness.
Well, my advice to you, speaking as a free league podcast, is let's do Twilight 2000 first. But after we've done Twilight 2000, I will gather some more players from among our patrons or somewhere. I don't know where I'm going to find them.
I need
yeah.
another motive. I always need motives. I need motivation continuously. It's the way I am.
But we will play this, but after we've played Twilight 2000.
Yes, and I suspect that this will be a one shot, and then will be forgotten in the annals of history.
So it should be. Yes.
But again, that is the sting in the tail. You did say you'd play it, so we will do that. And we'll see how we go. But the Twilight thing is going to be a bigger investment anyway, because A, I've invested in Twilight and intend to do a lot with it, and B, I very much enjoyed the scenario we ran with the original rules, and I would like to continue along that sort of vein with other stuff. So yeah, there you go.
There we go. So Twilight 2000 next at some point. We've also got to do a third Twilight 2000 book group, which we should get together with Thomas and work out when that's going to be.
I thought we did. Oh no, we didn't do that. In the
No,
end,
we
did
didn't. We haven't done it, and we want to talk vehicles and scrounging. I think.
Yes, yes, it was vehicles and scrounging. Scrounging, I think, is probably more important than vehicles, really,
Cool.
because it's the hex crawl mechanic, which you love in Forbidden Lands and things.
So we should check with Thomas and possibly do that next Tuesday. I imagine if we're keeping to our previous schedule. Are you free
That's
on
the
Tuesday?
12th. I think that's the 12th. I think I'm free. Yeah,
It's
we'll do
late
that.
at night. It's like 10 o'clock. We do those ones.
Yeah, no, that's fine.
Yeah.
Well, we
Cool.
have to anyway, 'cause of time zones and things, don't we? So
Yeah,
yeah.
exactly. Yeah. Vehicles and
Um,
travel and scrounging, says Thomas.
no, there you go.
Thomas, if you're listening to us, are we up for Tuesday? And Dave too, of course, but we don't really care. He doesn't have much of a conversation, does he?
Well, he just turns up, really. I mean,
Yeah, or not sometimes.
or not. Yeah.
Thomas isn't answering, but yeah, before then, I can promise, and we've already got a placeholder in our YouTube feed for Monday, which is the beginning of The Last Cyclade, this book here, which we are going to be carrying straight on from Emissary Lost.
And it will be 27 parts, or maybe 28, or maybe 29, or maybe 30.
I have resolved now in my head that I'm going to run the main scenarios with Dave and Tony and the crew, but a lot of the other stuff I'm going to run for convention play and things like that, so that we get to do it all and loads of people get to participate, and it's going to be fabulous.
I haven't seen the book. I'm told it has a wide range of material in it. I'm not going to say. I have actually been told.
I'm ready to. I'm hovering over the button where it just takes you
I'm
off
not
the
going to
feet.
say a word. I'm absolutely not going to say a word, but I do understand that it is a very extensive and long campaign, so you probably will get quite a lot out of it.
Yeah. Well, we got a
yeah.
year's play out of the last one, so I imagine a year's play out of this would be lovely.
Yeah, well, I mean, yeah, if you can do that. I mean, it's the same with the Symbaran books. I guess if you actually run those properly, you get a year or so play out of them, which is roughly the time between Kickstarters, coincidentally. So I think that's, um, I give up. Anyway, so yeah, there you go.
Raddy says that, but don't. I can just take you off the feed.
I'm not going to say a word. My lips are sealed.
Oh, and also Thomas says this, which is important.
That is.
Next Tuesday we are on for book group. I'll put a placeholder in the feed, and you've got to sort yourself out with a time, and then we'll run your Twilight 2000 adventure.
Yeah, well, changing jobs and a load of other things.
Yeah, no, I can understand. I'm not dissing you much more than I usually do, which is quite a lot.
You've done it for 40 years on the The book club thing, though, just to ask you, we're doing that for Twilight at the minute, but are we going to do that for other games and sort of dissect things, or?
Oh, we might. I think. I mean, it's been quite well received. We've had some nice comments on it, so that might be about Twilight 2000. But yeah, I think we might do something else.
But it just seems that it is a game that people on the Discord have invested in, and have some knowledge thereof, then maybe it's worth doing a sort of in-depth dive in the way we have with the Twilight one. Not, I don't mean they have to write software that generates millions of characters or something, but they could just sit there and go through the rules or whatever. Anyway,
yeah, cool. Right, so shall we say goodbye to our listeners?
I think so. Thank you for listening.
Goodbye
Subscribe.
to our listeners, and do that other stuff, which I said. What stuff did I say? I said this stuff.
Join the
like what we
Patreon.
do. Comment, subscribe, get notifications, and I said this stuff.
Yeah.
Join our Patreon for discussions like this 24/7 in our exclusive Discord, the nicest place on the net. And we've got another comment. That's Nathan, and he's saying, "See ya." Hold on. That's Thomas saying, "See ya," and Nathan saying, "Bye." So bye-bye.
Bye.